Okay, this is Rob Blum. I'm doing my second unfortunate recap of some of my personal opinions about what's going on in Israel, the war in Gaza, and the surrounding areas, the risks involved. Um, I'm chairman of Honest Reporting, a media accuracy organization that's been doing an incredible job um, illuminating the truth, revealing uh, biased or incorrect media coverage, and also helping journalists get the story right. But this is totally unrelated to that. These are my own personal opinions. Has nothing to do with HR. But please go to their website, honestreporting.com, and check in their news, subscribe to their stuff, go on instant media, look at their stuff, and if you can, please donate. Anyway, update on day 4. Over 1,000 Israelis were killed in the massacre on Saturday, and that fell into Sunday. Over 90% of them civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. Today it was revealed that over 40 babies were murdered, including some in the kibbutzim in the south, including some of these infants were beheaded. So, it's the worst day of violence against Jews since the Holocaust. It's just unfathomable, the savagery, the inhumanity of these people. You've all read about the 260, young adults killed at that music festival. I mean, these Hamas terrorists are crazy. President Biden said today in a great speech, actually, he said they're animals. He said they're ISIS-level savages, and they do need to be destroyed. Now, Israel claims to be mopping up, or the mopping up operations in the south are just about complete. We hope so. Purportedly, 1,500 terrorists invaded Israel and have been killed. There could be some fog of war and propaganda to that. The Israelis do things like that for their own people who are very shaken, but it seems to be pretty much over. The initial penetrations. The Palestinians also claim close to 1,000 dead in Gaza from airstrikes. I couldn't care less. I wish it was 10,000. Over 300,000 reservists have been called up in Israel so far, mostly for deployment in the south, but also in the north. I actually have a good friend who's got one boy who's just called up to be near Gaza. The other one is up near the Golan Heights. People in Israel are shocked. They're having the funeral since Sunday, and they're probably hopefully getting near the end. It's 1,000 funerals, but in the U.S. that's like 30,000 funerals, and everybody knows somebody who got killed. At worst or at best, 2 degrees of separation. It's a small country. It's a village. It's just how it is. The national trauma and insecurity is gigantic. But the unity of the people now to destroy the adversary is also gigantic. For all the crazy political crap that was going on, they're incredibly unified now. Just a silly stat. At the reserve call-up centers for soldiers, they're reporting attendance of 150 to 200%. How do you get that? Retired or cashiered soldiers are coming, even though they weren't called up, and they're begging to be taken back into their units, which is heartwarming, also sad. For all that Israel's changed over the years, though, the division, the elitism, it's refreshing to see that in extreme crises like this, the Israeli-Jewish muscle memory hasn't gone away. Really, it's one big family, one big village, and my wife is going crazy that she can't be there helping out, and me too. We kind of feel like refugees with our bags packed, but by all accounts, the value of us being there is not as good as the value of us not being there for the country. Um, anyway, that's the kind of where we are with the South. Just a little bit in the north, bordering Lebanon and Syria, there's an ongoing set of test attacks being staged by Hezbollah. And when I say test attacks, testing Israel's response. And Israel's been reacting with controlled reactions. I mean, they killed some senior Hezbollah officers yesterday, I think. But basically, they've been tit for tatting. And the feeling is that either Hezbollah is testing Israel for a response to see tactically what they would do, or they're just doing this because they don't want to seem like they're ignoring Hamas, while the Israeli Air Force is working Hamas over. But they don't want to but Hezbollah doesn't want to get in a war either, because it's they know that at this point, if they do get into a war with Israel, it's going to be existential for Hezbollah. I mean, Lebanon's a completely failed state, but Hezbollah completely controls Lebanon. So you'd say, well, it's like Iran. What do they care what happens to Lebanon? But there's a limit to that, and Israel's made very clear. And hopefully it's not just bluster. Hopefully they really have it to back it up, that they could and will totally destroy Lebanon if Hezbollah turns this into a full war. They've got well-armed, well-trained troops from the Syrian war, 150,000 rockets, so it's significant, the risk to Israel. But anyway, so Israel's just been proportionately responding, keeping the temperature to a low boil, not to trigger a war up north yet, and it seems to be working at this point. Let me talk about that word proportionate, actually, because I hate it. And it's why we have the problem we have with Gaza right now with Hamas. There's this stupid misreading of international law by international officials, the UN, by West Europeans, who use it as a way to beat up on Israel every time Israel seeks to defend itself against Hamas terrorism. They say, only 3 Israelis died. The defense, your reaction must be proportionate. Does that mean only 3 Palestinians have to die? If they fire 3,000 rockets, I think, was it last year? No, 2021. It was bad. We were there in May, and it was pretty bad, including Tel Aviv. And I think they fired like 3,000 rockets. Back then, the Iron Dome was working perfectly. Okay, I don't know. Supposedly tactics have changed, and other things that have made the Iron Dome not quite as effective this time, although it's still quite effective. And so, but if only 3 Israelis die because of that, does that mean only they have to hit Hamas as if only 3, Palestinians die? I don't know. I mean, I know the answer. It shouldn't, okay? But Israel always had that pressure proportionality on it. Now, what that did is, it's actually very immoral, because if someone attacks you and attacks you with the intent of trying to kill you, who's somebody else to say that I can't attack back to make them stop attacking me for good, okay, or to really, change their ability to attack me in the future. But with the whole proportionality BS, Israel wasn't able to do that. And, I learned on Wall Street, there's an old expression on Wall Street, your first loss is your best loss, right? So 10 years ago, when Hamas didn't have that many rockets, if you took care of the problem back then, it would have been a much less costly exercise to take care of it than now. So, you kick the can down the road, it's going to cost you much more later on. And that's now what Israel faces. So I'm not a big believer in proportionality. It's just a way to hamstring a moral response, because morally, an obligation to defend your people against a threat. Period. End of story. Whatever amount of force you need to do that. So proportionality really, I don't know where it comes from. Probably comes from some treaty in Switzerland that nobody should sign. Another thing that Western diplomats always talk, they're so odious and arrogant and hypocritical, is that it's come time for diplomacy, right? And so even though Biden made his speech the other day, his first speech, where he said Israel will have all the time it needs, stupid Tony Blinken, who's a well-meaning guy, he meets with Erdogan, the head of Turkey, who, by the way, Muslim Brotherhood, close kissing cousins of Hamas. He meets with Erdogan and he makes a statement, Blinken, that we should see a ceasefire fast. No, we don't want to see a ceasefire fast. We need to see this resolved, and that means the destruction of Hamas or extreme neutralization of Hamas. So anyway, that being said, the most time Israel's been given, I think, ever to resolve a war that needed to be resolved was 32 days in 2006 by George W. Bush. And so Israel's got to execute this war as if it doesn't have, months and months and months to do it. And that takes us to the execution of the war in Gaza. Israel continues to blow up Gaza by air, but they've done this before, right? So, you only defeat an enemy by doing it on the ground. You debase their capabilities for a period of time by bombing from the air. Hopefully this is something the Israelis by now they've learned, because the people knew it years ago. People in the South knew it years ago. The government in Jerusalem wasn't really paying attention because Bibi and other governments were happy with this balance that was working. This balance of maintaining the temperature with Hamas was working. Hamas has threatened to kill hostages if Gaza civilians are killed without warning. This is Hamas trying to set the rules of warfare after their savagery. They don't get to set those rules of warfare. Israel's attacked the Rafah crossing point from Egypt. And one would think that they'll quickly take over the Philadelphia strip at the southern end of Gaza, the part that's contiguous to Egypt. So then at that point, Gaza will be completely shut off from the world, which, they've always complained they were. And by shutting the border with Egypt, it will be. They'll get their wish. Strategy in Gaza, there aren't a lot of great choices, of course. If there was no time limit and no moral qualms, many of us would love to see Israel follow the strategy of the Germans against Warsaw, and the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, or the Russians in Chechnya, which really is total destruction of Gaza City, Rafah, Khan Yunis, just by indiscriminate artillery, total disregard for civilian casualties. I know this sounds horrible. I don't think Israel's morally capable of it, but many individuals like me would be at this point. I mean, this is just a sick people, and they weren't always like this, but they did democratically elect Hamas, and they are responsible for that. And I'd much rather there be dead Palestinians than dead Israeli soldiers trying to pacify Gaza. And that's the problem, right? Israel's already turned off power, water, and food supplies to Gaza. But, to put more pressure on them to give up the hostages, including the children. I mean, you see these pictures of these. We've seen so many of pictures of different hostages. The thing that kills me the most are these two, a 9-month-old and a several-year-old, bright red-headed boys being held by their mother. I mean, what kind of animals take people like that as hostages? It's just, again, that's why I have no, there's no words that can be used. But as far as the turn off of power, water, and supplies, Hamas anticipated all this. They were ready for a long war. So I don't think that pressures them to give up hostages anytime soon. And after all, they've never cared about the ordinary Gazan citizens. Hamas has never cared about them. They've used them as human shields. So do they really care? Will that stop it? Maybe at some point, if you could just, hold them in place long enough. But I don't know. But then you have that 32-day rule, or you have, whatever the world decides to impose on Israel for, when this has to stop. As we discussed last time, Israel's, I don't know, Israel's hasn't prepared its military for the type of war that, a real full invasion and control type war. Over the last decade or two, I don't know why politics, management of the situation didn't require it, elitist avarice, I don't know why, but they haven't trained. They've trained for a special forces attack, not for a broad divisional ground attack. And, I'll give you some examples that will blow your mind. Israeli ground forces at the unit level, non-elite, ground forces, infantry, artillery, particularly reserve units, okay? They're the tankers. They're begging private contributors everything from food to night vision scopes and ballistic vests. A friend's husband, who was called up immediately, hadn't received food for 24 hours. His whole unit hadn't received any food for 24 hours from the military. They were out somewhere in the field somewhere. Nothing. Until, fortunately, Israelis, regular citizens have been bringing food and all kinds of supplies to, to units everywhere, and everyone texts each other. And when you find out that your son's unit, doesn't have food, or they need, not at this time of year yet, but they need, raincoats or winter jackets, all of a sudden the parents start going, and, inside hours, you have civilians, either crowdfunding, collecting crap together, or just driving up there in their personal cars, or driving down there in their personal cars to the field, bringing their kids' unit stuff. And, woe be the sentry who stops parents, Israeli parents, from bringing supplies to their kids. In the art, it's very funny. I guess it's the benefit of a war on your own soil and proximity to the front, but whatever. That's a bad thing to be hoping for. Anyway, if you go back to the risk of Israel suffering egregious casualties in a full-fledged war to take control of Gaza, and the idea of, Wehrmacht in Gaza, all out of the Warsaw Ghetto, and that doesn't work politically. If those don't work, what choices does Israel have? And leaving it alone is not a choice. I personally still feel that a full occupation, while could be extremely painful, is necessary to enable the real reform of Gaza, because you have to reform the political system there, and the system of control there. Or you're going to have the same thing again, in another form. It will be enormously costly, but compared to the current situation, I don't know. What are your choices? Others, but there is other choices. Others are talking about, and I don't know why I'm with my Polish metaphors today, I guess because I'm married to a Pole, but others are talking about the Warsaw Ghettoization of Gaza. Basically attacking and taking territory piece by piece from the outside inward until you've taken a lot of Gaza away. You've turned it into really a rump state. Its economic capabilities almost completely destroyed. It's dependent upon the outside. And Israel telling the world that when Hamas is ready to come out and be replaced, Israel will give the rest of the territory that it's taken back to an agreed upon government under international supervision, blah, 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 whatever fake words you can go with. Um, I can't see that solution working better with the international community than a full occupation, or than just bombing the living daylights out of the place so that it's all rubble. Um, but we'll see. Anyway, what of Hezbollah opening a second front? Which is really Israel's nightmare. Is Hezbollah opening a second front in the north by Lebanon? Call me an optimist, and there aren't too many of us around, and I'm never an optimist. But to me, the logic tells me I don't see it happening in a doomsday level way. And doomsday level means invasion by Hezbollah, you know, soldiers, the same way that happened to Israel from Hamas, with slaughters of citizens. Israel has to push back. You have 150,000 missiles in Lebanon pointed at Israel, and just a full ass total war. That's the nightmare, right? Israel's Iron Dome would be overcome. The laser dome system, they keep saying mañana, mañana. Hopefully, they're holding it and it's magically going to be there, but that still won't do it. So, I don't know. That's the nightmare, right? But on the other hand, if they see Gaza being strangled, it will kill Iranian credibility if they don't step in and do something. So, even though they've been trying to keep a balance, you know, they could be pressed to do something. And then once they do something, more than what they've been doing, it could accelerate out of control. Now Hezbollah, Nasrallah runs Hezbollah. He isn't crazy. They've been careful at times. They've been very measured. But they're pretty sure Israel will destroy Lebanon, and the de facto rule, will be over if they go all out against Israel. So you wouldn't think that Nasrallah and Hezbollah would be inclined to go full war against Israel, unless Iran forces them to do it and compels them. They are a client state of Iran, and without Iran's money, Hezbollah would cease to exist, based where Lebanon is today. So now you say, okay, well, how do you deter Iran from driving Hezbollah to go 100% against Israel? You know, Biden, even in spite of Biden's heartfelt speeches, and I really think he's said all the right things. I said this a couple of days ago. People I talk to don't think the U.S. can be relied upon to use more than words against Iran, unless Iran does something stupid like, attack a U.S. ship, or Israel convince the U.S. to do so. How does Israel convince the U.S. to attack Iran if they're getting, really destroyed? Rockets. My apartment in Tel Aviv is toast, and everything. I guess maybe in a presidential election year, maybe there's some political calculus that gets them to do something. It could be Israel shows some intelligence report about Iranian nuclear whatever, or Israel's able to convince Biden that Israel really is going to fall, which would be a tragedy for America's political situation in the world. Forget about what it would mean otherwise, for Israel and Jewish people. And then, of course, there's the threat of if it's believable that it's an existential crisis, and it could be an existential crisis, a Hezbollah full attack in conjunction maybe with the West Bank blowing up on Israel and Hamas. Okay, is it out of the question that Israel will consider using nuclear arms on Iran? That's the type of thing that nuclear arms that they say they don't have, but of course everybody knows they have. That's the type of thing that could potentially, force American action. But I don't think it has to go there. And the reason is because even without American help, Israel's got the capability to destroy it. Iran has 12 refineries or so, okay, 10 or 12 refineries, 4 big ones, okay, and Karg Island is, the big place. Um, it would screw up the entire. It would screw up the Gulf. It would probably hurt. I don't know what it would do to the world economy. It wouldn't be good. Even though if Israel were to attack one, two, three, or four of the big refineries, they would bring the Iranian economy to its knees. Very possibly you'd end up with regime change. And the Iranians will do what they have to do to protect the regime. And to me, I think you kind of have a mutual assured destruction capability there, to deter the Iranians from forcing Hezbollah, or from allowing Hezbollah, if whoever really wants to do it, from allowing Hezbollah to go full ass on Israel. And that is, you do that, and that's it for your oil. That's it for your refining capability. And that's probably it for your economy. It's probably it for your power. And so it's a mutually assured destruction thing. And to me, I don't know. It makes sense that could deter a meaningful Hezbollah attack. I mean, they're going to have to do stuff to so that Iran and Hezbollah don't totally lose credibility with the other evil actors of the world. It's like Dr. Evil, but that's the way I see it. Now, like I said, it's the Iranians. I think they're rational. So one can't control what happens with Hezbollah, but destroying or substantially eliminating Hamas is merely a factor of time and how much Jewish blood and Gaza blood Israel has a stomach to spill. So where does that leave us? And again, I really don't believe Hezbollah goes all out. I think there's deterrent capability there. But where does that leave us? So, the thing I'd be most worried about at that point is the West Bank and Israel's Arab-Israeli fifth column. The Arab Israelis, or the Muslim Arab Israelis, they're about 20% of Israel's population. We had a terrible problem in May 2021 where in mixed cities, driven by Hamas it was driven by Hamas agitation. There were really pogroms, Arab pogroms in mixed cities, mixed Arab-Jewish cities. Everyone, and then by the way, the agitation from that, the shock of that, after the Israelis are being told, oh, they're part of our country, we're one united country, bullshit. But after the shock of that helped drive the vote towards this more right-wing government that we have today, which is, because it hit at the core of a lot of Israelis. I remember I had coffee with a friend of mine at a coffee shop in Tel Aviv, populated by your typical Tel Aviv secular, very lefty-looking people. And the table next to us, we heard people talking about, doing terrible things to their own Arab community after that. It was shocking. Anyway, I think Israel's much more prepared for the potential explosion of, that orgiastic violence that can come out of the Arab-Israeli sector. But defense capabilities, security capabilities are going to be pulled in all kinds of directions. You got Hamas, you're still going to have to keep, up north, you're going to have to be careful. You can't depend upon the mutual assured destruction that I'm hoping for. And you have an Arab-Israeli sector that's extremely well armed with illegal weapons, tolerated, and some might even say encouraged by past Israeli governments and by the intelligence services, for all kinds of reasons over the last several decades. Most of it during the now clearly incompetent Bibi governments. But it's not worth being political. It's a lot of different governments. It was just poorly run. The attitude of Israeli police was, as long as the Arabs are killing each other, don't worry. But they kept smuggling weapons in, stealing weapons from the army, and there are a lot of weapons there, and a lot of organized crime too. Now, the intelligence community usually organized gangs for intelligence, so they feel they have some level of control, but who knows, right? Um, and because Arab Muslims have a nasty propensity to kind of snap in gleeful violence. I mean, it's really gleeful violence when they see Jews looking weak, and you got to worry about that. I know that sounds racist, but that's just experience from observation. I'll tell you a little story. A lot of friends live there. It's about a third made up of Anglo Jews, Jews from English-speaking countries. They just announced yesterday that for the time being, no construction or home repair people can enter the gates of Modi'in unless they are Jewish. A lot of the people in construction are actually Israeli Arabs or Palestinian Arabs who come in on permits. So, that fear is real and the precautions are real. And so you can't discount that. I read the statement. I said, could you imagine this in the U.S.? But natural law is you defend yourself first. You worry about people's feelings second. Not the way it is here, though. In the U.S. Then there are the Arabs on the West Bank and Judea and Samaria, another part of the equation. They've been acting up more and more. Whether one reason is in anticipation of the demise of Mahmoud Abbas and the PA, Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, but also people feel that they've been doing it as a diversionary tactic to bring troops up from Gaza to focus on them, to divert so that when Hamas was ready to attack, they attacked. And honestly, the two divisions that were moved up there in the last couple of weeks from Gaza to the West Bank, it would have been pretty useful on Saturday to deal with the terrorists. I mean, so there's an argument to be made there, and especially since Hamas and the even closer Iranian proxy, Islamic Jihad, are very active in the northern West Bank. That story holds for me. Finally, and I don't know, it's just a cause of despair. I mean, anxiety and despair. As a believer in Western civilization, I cannot understand the support of the Hamas massacres that you're seeing in protests around the world, particularly from young people, particularly college-educated, elite young people. Okay, with chants in a Times Square protest on Sunday of 700, 700. The time they thought the death toll was 700, and they were praising the murder of 700 Jewish civilians by the savagery of Hamas. I mean, crazy. We have it's horrible. Okay, very, very depressing. And this is a fight for Western civilization, just like the fight against ISIS was, and Al Qaeda was. And in this one, Israel is merely the first course, as usual. And actually, another factoid: since the beginning of the year, ready for this? 151 people on the U.S. terrorism watch list have been caught coming up through the Mexican border. How many weren't caught? And the ones who weren't caught, are we next for beheadings? I mean, you don't know. Remember, these people, it's part of their religious belief that you're either going to be subjugated or killed. And it's kind of scary. Anyway, and they don't believe in Western civilization, the mores of liberal Western civilization. And the fact that we have kids going through our elite schools today and other lunatics walking around in the streets who believe in these things, we are due for a battle of civilizations. And really, that's what the war in Israel is about now. So please support Israel and speak up. I mean, I tell everyone I know, if you can, if people can hang Ukrainian flags outside their houses, why aren't I seeing more Israeli flags? And hopefully that changes, because we're all in this one together. Anyway, that's your update. Let's keep our fingers crossed. And bye bye. How do I? Okay, that's it. Bye bye.